Mira jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her pulse hammering in her ears. The room was pitch black, save for the dull red light of the alarm clock, which read 3:15 am. The dream had been so vivid, so real, flashes of faces she didn't recognize, whispers she couldn't decipher, all converging in a crescendo of panic that still clung to her. She tried to shake off the lingering unease, but something felt wrong. There was a presence in the room, she was sure of it. She strained her ears, listening to the silence, feeling the suffocating darkness press against her skin. It was the fourth night in a row that she'd had the dream. It started the same way. She was in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by people who seemed to know her, but whose faces were blurred, as if seen through frosted glass. Then the whispers would begin, growing louder and more insistent until they were screaming in her ears. Mira swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts as she fumbled for the lamp on the bedside table. When the light flickered on, she scanned the room. Everything was in its place. No intruders, but the feeling of being watched persisted, an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. She had moved to this old Victorian house a month ago, hoping for a fresh start after a brutal divorce. The house was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place to heal and rediscover herself, but it had only deepened her sense of isolation. There was something unsettling about the house, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Mira walked to the window and pushed aside the heavy curtains. The street outside was deserted, the glow from the lampposts casting eerie shadows on the pavement. She stared at the old oak tree in the front yard, its gnarled branches twisted like arthritic fingers. A figure stood beneath it. Her heart leapt into her throat. She blinked, but the figure remained, motionless, shrouded in darkness. It was too far away to make out any details, but she could feel its gaze, piercing through the night, locking onto her. She stepped back from the window, her mind racing. Who would be standing outside her house at this hour? She turned away, trying to dismiss the image as a trick of the light, but the unease gnawed at her. She needed answers about the dreams, about the house, about the figure beneath the tree. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she knew about the house's history. The next day, she visited the local library, seeking records on the house. It was an old building, its walls lined with the scent of aged paper and dust. Mira found the section dedicated to the town's history and began poring over the records. The house had been built in the late 1800s by a man named Dr. Elias Blackwood, a renowned psychiatrist known for his unconventional methods. As she dug deeper, she uncovered disturbing details. Dr. Blackwood had used the house as both his residence and a private asylum for his most troubled patients. There were whispers of unethical experiments, patients subjected to treatments that bordered on torture. The house had seen unspeakable suffering, and some of the patients had vanished without a trace. Mira's stomach churned as she read the accounts. Could the dreams be connected to the house's dark past? She felt a chill run down her spine as she imagined the screams of the patients echoing through the halls, the walls soaked with their pain and fear. What if the house was trying to communicate with her, to reveal the secrets buried within its walls? Determined to find out more, she reached out to a local historian who specialized in the town's darker history. They met at a quaint cafe, where the historian, a frail man with a thin voice, shared stories that made Mira's blood run cold. He spoke of Dr. Blackwood's obsession with the human mind, his belief that psychological trauma could be harnessed to unlock hidden potential. His methods were extreme, pushing patients to the brink of insanity to see what lay beyond. Mira couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far beyond her understanding. The dreams, the figure beneath the tree, the house's gruesome history, it all felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to comprehend. The historian mentioned that some believed the house was cursed, that the spirits of the tormented patients still lingered, seeking closure or revenge. That night, as she lay in bed, sleep eluded her. The silence of the house felt oppressive, every creak of the floorboards a reminder that she was not alone. She tried to reassure herself that it was just her imagination, but the memories of the day's revelations refused to fade. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see the figure beneath the oak tree again. When sleep finally claimed her, the dream returned, more intense than ever. She was back in the house, but it was different, darker, the air thick with despair. The whispers were louder, more distinct, as if they were speaking directly to her. She felt a presence behind her, and when she turned, she saw a man standing there, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow. He reached out to her, his voice a raspy whisper. "Help me." Mira awoke with a start, her heart pounding. She knew she had to get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. She couldn't go on living like this, trapped in a house that seemed intent on driving her mad. The next day, she decided to explore the house, starting with the basement, a place she had avoided since moving in. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. As she descended the creaking stairs, she felt a sense of foreboding, as if she were entering a place where she didn't belong. The light from her flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. She reached the bottom and began to explore, her breath visible in the frigid air. In the far corner, she found an old door, its wood rotting, the handle rusted. It took all her strength to pry it open, revealing a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with shelves, and on them sat rows of dusty jars, each labeled with a patient's name. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the jars and wiped away the grime. Inside was a small, shriveled object. She couldn't tell what it was, but it filled her with a deep sense of dread. She quickly set the jar back down and turned to leave, but something caught her eye: a journal, half buried under a pile of old rags. She picked it up and flipped through the pages. It was Dr. Blackwood's journal, filled with notes about his experiments. As she read, her horror grew. The doctor had believed that by pushing his patients to the brink, he could separate the mind from the body, allowing him to explore the human psyche in its purest form. Mira felt a wave of nausea as she read about the patients who hadn't survived the process, their bodies discarded, their minds trapped in a state of perpetual torment. The journal ended abruptly, the final entry a scrawl of incoherent thoughts, as if the doctor himself had succumbed to the madness he had inflicted on others. She dropped the journal, her hands shaking. She had to get out of the house, leave it behind, and never look back. But as she turned to leave the basement, she heard the door creak shut behind her. Panic surged through her as she rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. She heard the whispers again, but this time they were clearer, the voices of the patients, their pleas for help, their cries of anguish. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure from her dreams appeared before her, his hollow eyes filled with pain. "Why didn't you help us?" the figure whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. "I didn't know," Mira stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what he was doing." "You do now," the figure replied, stepping closer. "You have to make it right." Mira felt tears well up in her eyes as the weight of their suffering bore down on her. She didn't know how she could possibly make it right, but she knew she couldn't just walk away. She had to confront the darkness that had taken root in the house, to release the souls trapped within its walls. The door suddenly creaked open, and Mira stumbled out of the basement, gasping for air. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't fight the darkness alone. She needed help. She reached out to a group of paranormal investigators, hoping they could cleanse the house, free the spirits, and bring peace to the tortured souls trapped within. When the investigators arrived, they conducted a thorough investigation, using tools and techniques Mira had never seen before. The air crackled with tension as they communicated with the spirits, trying to understand their pain and help them find closure. The process was grueling, the house resisting their efforts at every turn. As they delved deeper into the house's past, they uncovered more horrors, more victims whose lives had been consumed by Dr. Blackwood's madness. The investigators worked tirelessly, their faces pale with exhaustion, but determined to bring an end to the suffering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they succeeded. The air in the house felt lighter, the oppressive darkness lifting. The spirits were at peace, their torment finally over. Mira could feel the change, a profound sense of relief washing over her. But as she stood in the empty hallway, she knew she couldn't stay. The house would never truly be her home, not after everything that had happened. She packed her belongings and left, the memories of the past month haunting her as she drove away. As she glanced in the rearview mirror, she saw the figure standing beneath the oak tree one last time. But this time, there was no malice in its gaze, only a quiet sadness, a final farewell. Mira drove on, the road ahead uncertain, but her resolve stronger than ever. The darkness she had faced had left its mark on her, but it had also given her a new purpose. She would dedicate her life to helping those who had been touched by the same darkness, to ensure that no one else would suffer the way the spirits in that house had. And as she drove away, she knew she would never forget the house, nor the souls that had called out to her from the depths of despair.